Hi guys, Catmaster here, and today I want to talk a little bit about my Herald of Agony Juggernaut build that I've been playing in the hardcore solo self-owned Metamorph League up to level 93 already. So in the beginning I league started with bow builds, died a couple of times on Toxic Rain Pathfinder builds, and then decided, hey, I want to go with the sure shot, I want to go with something super tanky, and one of the tankiest archetypes of characters is the endurance charge stacking Juggernaut, and I'm gonna go into why that is the case in just a moment. But before we go into the video, subscribe to the channel and thank you for liking the videos. That's the only way that independent content creators can stay competitive here on YouTube. A quick reminder, I stream every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday at 4:20 Central European Time. So if you have any questions about the build at all, make sure to either drop a comment below or to visit me on my stream. So, endurance charges are key to this build. Endurance charges grant you 4% physical damage reduction per endurance charge, which stacks additively with other sources of physical damage reduction, and 4% to all elemental resistances. Now, I am a Juggernaut on this build, right? So we actually get an additional endurance charge from Unflinching, plus a very reliable way to generate endurance charges, and from Unrelenting, we get the augmented endurance charges. We get an additional % physical damage reduction per endurance charge. We get reduced elemental damage taken while at maximum endurance charges, and 4% chaos resistance per endurance charge. We pick additional endurance charges in the passive tree, all that are available. That's 3 on top of the base endurance charges that you get, which is also 3. So that's a total of 6. We get 1 from Juggernaut, and we get 1 each from the Calm's Way rings, which are the upgraded version of the Calm's Sign rings. Calm's Sign is a fairly common ring, but with a prophecy that you get from the Valley, you can upgrade it to Calm's Way. That prophecy is not very common. It's not super rare either. It's pretty rare though. And these rings are very, very important to the build's tankiness. With these rings, each of the rings grants you 0.4% life regen per second per endurance charge. So both rings with 9 endurance charges are, I think, around 7.2% life regen per second. And then there's of course some other regen per endurance charge that you can pick up in the tree. And the character has a huge amount of regen, around 15 to 1600 while idling, I think, currently, with all the endurance charges up. But then obviously, because you're a Juggernaut, you also get Unbreakable, which regenerates 2% of life per second, which you can see in the regen, but you also get 1.5% of the total physical damage prevented from hits in the past 10 seconds regenerated as life per second, which is really easy to underestimate, but that can quickly amount to a lot of regen as well. The Herald of Agony skill is like the other heralds in the game. There's 5 heralds in the game, 1 for every damage type. There's 1 fire, cold, lightning, physical, and a chaos herald. The Herald of Agony is the chaos one, but it's actually not associated with chaos damage in general, but more particularly with poison, as it grants you 20% chance to poison on hit as a buff and 10% more poison damage, but it also summons an agony crawler via a stat mechanic. Every time you poison an enemy while you have the Herald of Agony up, you gain a stack of virulence. The more virulence you have, the higher the rate at which the virulence decays over time. As long as you have virulence stacks up, the Agony Crawler is summoned. And the Agony Crawler has stats based on how many stacks of virulence you have. So you want to keep those virulence stacks up as often and as high as possible. They cap out at 40. So the way that you do that in this build is you run Cyclone with a Poison on Hit Claw, and you link Poison on Hit as a gem to the Cyclone. and that way you can apply poison to all the enemies in the AoE. Herald of Agony is traditionally a skill that doesn't really need a whole lot of damage investment, at least it didn't until it got nerfed. I think it got nerfed this time around. Especially it got nerfed obviously indirectly by all the bosses getting HP buffs and resistance buffs. But I think you can still make it work relatively nicely. I've seen a lot of people play this build still, and this is my solo self-found take on it. Obviously I don't have the perfect stuff here and there, and there's some things I really still need. I'll go over some things in the end. I'm quickly gonna give you a little bit of an idea about what the build can do. On top of the Herald of Agony, which we're linking with minion damage, damage on full life support, and pierce, this is important. You can always link damage on full life support because the Agony Crawler doesn't have any HP and it's not targetable, and it can take damage. So it actually always benefits from damage on full life support. And you want Pierce for the clear. For single target you can actually change Pierce for vicious projectiles. But next to the Herald of Agony, we're running Skitterbots, as we're almost running in every build nowadays because they're really good value even after they've been nerfed, even at the lower value, right? They still chill and shock enemies for up to 20% chill and shock effect, which is really good. And we're actually running Spectres. We're running a Host Chieftain and a Stygian Silverback, which grant Frenzy and Power Charges respectively. I link them with Meat Shield and Blood Magic as their Frenzy and Power Charge granting abilities consume mana, so they can't spam them. You need to link them with Blood Magic for consistent charge generation, and Meat Shield to make them more survivable. At this point, where we're going into the higher red maps with this build, we have the problem often that the Spectres end up dying, so I'm looking to get more supports on them, but that's all we have for now. Because the build has so much physical damage reduction and sustain through regeneration, it is perfect for farming the Eternal Lab, as it's literally unkillable. Well, I mean, you can still kill it, but it's almost impossible to die to the traps in the lab with this build. I essence crafted this claw on the wrong base. There's actually a base that grants 50 life gain on hit, rather than the 46 I get from this Imperial Claw. I crafted this with an Essence of Fear, guaranteeing the minion damage and hoping for the chance to poison on hit, which of course eventually we got. And then I was hoping also for a free suffix, so I could craft the Trigger a Socketed Spell when you use a skill, which is really good for automating stuff. Currently we're automating Projectile Weakness, which is a curse that helps with the damage of the Agony Crawler, because that's all projectile damage, and Desecrate, which spawns corpses, and Spirit Offering, which is an offering skill. Offering skills grant buffs to your minions only, unless you're a Necromancer or a Scion, or you have that weird chest piece that makes offerings affect your character as well. Spirit Offering actually grants 20% physical as extra chaos to your minions, so it's really good for the Agony Crawler, because the Agony Crawler has base physical damage and a native 40% physical to chaos conversion, so it benefits really nicely from that. On top of that, it also gives the minions 4% of their max life as extra maximum energy shield per corpse consumed, so it actually helps keeping my Spectres alive, as well as my Holy Relic, which I'm running on top. Holy Relic is a skill that summons a relic that uses a Nova skill with a very low cooldown that triggers whenever you hit an enemy with an attack. As we're cycloning around all the time, this is just perfect because the Nova goes off all the time, granting life regen to allies and minions, and dealing damage to enemies. I also link Feeding Frenzy and Culling Strike to my Holy Relic, so that it actually culls enemies at 10% life or lower, and grants the Feeding Frenzy buff. Feeding Frenzy is a buff that grants my minions 10% more minion damage, 15% increased movement speed, and 15% attack and cast speed. In order to be always able to use my Cyclone, which is essential because Cyclone makes you immune to knockback and stun, and it enables you to gain a lot of life on hit because it hits a lot, and it lets me poison enemies to summon the Agony Crawler, I use the Blood Magic support, which is not necessary because I could take it out and I wouldn't run out of mana instantly. I would still be able to Cyclone around a little bit, but I just want to be 100% sure I can Cyclone all the time without interruption. And of course I link it with Fortify because I want to gain the Fortify buff. The tree outside of getting this minion cluster with Redemption, Spiritual Aid, Righteous Army, and getting a little bit of minion attack speed that will also apply to my character, Spiritual Command, and sacrifice for a little bit, just a tiny little bit of survivability so that my specters don't die, especially now that I was flipping the gems and re-leveling them up. The tree is largely life and defenses. We're getting one Fortify cluster, we're getting Soul of Steel, and just recently we're able to corrupt a jewel for Corrupted Blood cannot be inflicted on you, which is really huge. The trigger a targeted spell when you use a skill claw is really nice. It does only trigger when I start cycloning though. Keeping Cyclone up does not count as using a skill, so you either have to click Cyclone several times or you use Flame Dash and Convocation and Enduring Cry in between to trigger the socketed skill gems. I use a Belt of the Deceiver because nearby enemies are intimidated, makes nearby enemies take 10% increased attack damage, which benefits my minions. And I'm using Victario's Charity, which we managed to corrupt for 8% physical from hits taken as lightning, which is really nice because those 8% fizz now have to go through my lightning resist. And +2 Warcry gems, which is, you know, nothing special, but we're putting the Enduring Cry in here, so that way we benefit from that corrupt as well. Victoria's Charity is great because it grants me a chance to grant frenzy charges to nearby allies, so if for some reason the supply of frenzy charges from the monkeys is inconsistent, then we can actually grant frenzy charges to enemies with our high hit rate as well, and so keep up the maximum frenzy charges at all time. I managed to hit a regen enchant on these boots that also have really nice chaos resist, but other than that we have pretty mediocre gear on this build and we're looking forward to getting a lot of upgrades. Mostly I also have a helmet. I managed to hit a +1 max number of Sentinels of Purity enchant on this Joffrey's Legacy. Joffrey's Legacy is the upgraded version of Joffrey's Crest, which allows you to summon an additional Holy Relic. So I am actually thinking about changing this build into a Holy Relic build with Herald of Purity on top for single target damage, but I'm not sure how good it will be, how much investment the Herald of Purity needs in order to be good. I'm willing to try it, but I'm afraid it may not be as good as Herald of Agony. I'm also keeping a Gluttony belt on me at all times, because Gluttony makes you take physical damage when you use a movement skill. So whenever I go and do a Metamorph or do whatever content I cannot generate endurance charges on beforehand, I can put on this belt and just dash around a couple of times until I got full endurance charges. With Juggernaut, as discussed, we have a 30% chance to gain an endurance charge when hit, but even if you don't proc that chance, you gain an endurance charge every second if you've been hit recently, and every time that you do get an endurance charge, you instead gain up to your maximum number of endurance charges with a chance of 25%, meaning that if you get endurance charges 4 times, on average, one of those 4 times will trigger that your endurance charges will just fill up instantly. What's also great about being a Jug is Unstoppable. You have cannot be stunned, and action speed and movement speed cannot be modified to below base value. So even if I stop cycloning and run around, I can't be stunned. and I can't be frozen. I mean, technically I can be frozen, but I can still move around if I am. So if you're interested to see the build in action, make sure to check out my live stream. Link is in the description down below, as well as a link to the path of building of the character in this current state that the video is recorded in. And other than that, I want to say thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Have a wonderful day.